He was only 10. Terrence, small for his age, soft voice, didn't like loud noises, loved to draw. And one day, that was enough to make him look guilty. A window broke, a backpack left behind, a name that he didn't question, and a courtroom already rehearsing the sentence before he even opened his mouth. Judge Stanford Clay didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Power doesn't shout when the system is designed to whisper injustice. The arrest report was weak, the evidence thinner than paper, but the decision had already been made, not based on what was known, but on what they were willing to ignore. Terrence sat in that courtroom, feet dangling off the chair, watching adults debate whether he'd ever see the world again without bars in front of his eyes. Then he stood up and spoke. One sentence, just one, and suddenly, the room full of voices went silent. This isn't a story about rage. It's about what happens when someone who's been trained to be quiet decides not to. If you've ever watched a kid get blamed just because it's easier, hit like, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Some stories don't start with a crime. They start with the kind of silence that dares you to sit through the whole truth. Terrence sat with his feet not reaching the floor. A 10-year-old boy in a courtroom built to cage men 3 times his size. The wood around him was dark, old, and heavy, like it had swallowed too many stories and forgot how to release them. His orange jumpsuit didn't fit. The sleeves were rolled, the pant legs bunched at the ankles. He didn't tug at them, didn't move much. He just sat small and still between a tired public defender and the weight of silence. Judge Stanford Clay leaned forward. White hair, wide shoulders, narrow eyes. A man who called his courtroom his house and meant it. He looked down at the boy, not like a child, but like something on his desk that shouldn't have been there. Mr. Terrence Wilkins, Clay said, voice slow and even, you are charged with felony theft, obstruction of justice, and assaulting a police officer. Do you understand the charges? Terrence nodded, not because he understood, but because that's what the last adult told him to do. Across the room, the prosecutor adjusted his tie, smirking. He hadn't even opened a folder. He didn't need to. The story was written before the boy ever walked in. It started with a broken store window, a corner shop, middle of the night, alarm blaring. Police arrived. No suspects, just a backpack on the ground. In that backpack, school books with the name Terrence Wilkins written in shaky pen. It was enough. They showed up at his school the next morning, pulled him from class, didn't let him call his mother, didn't let him explain. They said he ran. They said he resisted. One officer said Terrence lunged. No cameras, no witnesses, just bruises on the boy. The public defender cleared his throat. His name was Mr. Ramirez. He'd been assigned the night before. He leaned toward the judge. Your Honor, if I may, my client is 10 years old. This is a nonviolent offense. There are severe questions about the police report's integrity, and objection sustained. The prosecutor cut in, even though nothing had been objected. Clay nodded, like it made sense. Let's proceed, he said. This court has no patience for delay tactics. Ramirez looked at Terrence. His lips tightened. His eyes didn't. Terrence hadn't spoken yet. Not a word. No one had asked him anything that wasn't already answered for him. He wanted to say it wasn't his backpack, that someone had taken it, that he'd left it in the library 2 days earlier. He wanted to say he didn't run, that he was scared, that he didn't lunge, he fell. But the courtroom wasn't built for his kind of truth. It was built for records, for signatures, for yes, sir, and no, ma'am. Not for kids with thin wrists and eyes that didn't water, even when they should. The clerk read the charges again. Judge Clay leaned back, folding his hands. This court, taking into account the severity of the offenses, the defendant's refusal to cooperate during arrest, and his prior behavioral record. He has no record, Ramirez said. Clay ignored him. Finds it appropriate to sentence the defendant to life in a juvenile detention facility, with review after 40 years. No possibility of parole before age 50. Silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Ramirez rose. Your Honor, that's unconstitutional. He's 10. Sit down, Clay said, voice louder now. This courtroom will not be hijacked by theatrics. I've made my ruling. He reached for the gavel, And that's when Terrence stood up, small, still in the oversized jumpsuit. His voice quiet, but it cut through the air. "Can I say something?" The courtroom stilled. Clay blinked. "You may." Terrence reached into his pocket. The bailiff stepped forward. "He's not allowed to." Ramirez put out a hand. "It's just a recorder. Let him." Clay frowned. Terrence held it up. "Press play." A voice filled the courtroom. Not his, not Ramirez's, not even the cops. It was Clay's. "You think I care if the kid did it? He's another mouth on the street. If we start letting them off easy, we'll have more like him next week." Pause. Another voice, uncertain lower. "But Judge, he's 10. Clay again, "Which is why we start early." Ramirez closed his eyes. The room went silent. No one moved. Clay's face drained of color. The prosecutor's pen slipped from his hand. It wasn't rage. It was exposure. And exposure in a courtroom is louder than any scream. Terrence looked up, voice clear. "If justice needs me to be guilty just because I'm black, then it was never justice." He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just said it and sat back down. Chaos didn't follow. Not yet. It was too quiet for chaos. But the tremor had started. One juror stood. "I didn't sign off on that sentence," she said. The court reporter turned off her mic. The prosecutor left the room. Clay didn't move. He couldn't. Later it came out. The recorder had been left running by accident during a private conversation in chambers 2 days prior. Terrence's older brother, a janitor working nights, found it while cleaning, recognized Clay's voice, and gave it to his brother during the hearing. Legal, clear, undeniable. The sentence was vacated that afternoon. Clay was placed under review within hours, resigned within 2 days. But Terrence didn't celebrate. When reporters found him outside, he said nothing, just looked at the sky like he was still waiting for someone to say sorry. No one did. The courtroom emptied in silence. Not the usual kind. Not the shuffling of files. Not the polite murmurs. This was the kind that made people walk slower, like the floor beneath them wasn't finished settling. The sound of Judge Stanford Clay's voice, his real voice, not the one rehearsed for rulings, was still hanging in the air. The kind of sound you couldn't unhear. A few hours later, it was everywhere. The news didn't report it first. Twitter did. Then TikTok. 10-year-old boy just broke system. Listen to this. He was about to be locked up for life. Then he played the tape. Judge caught admitting racial bias on audio. Child walks free. It took exactly 38 minutes before the first journalist showed up outside the courthouse. It took 4 hours before Clay was trending nationwide. It took 1 day before the tape was played on the evening news, unedited. And it took Terrence 2 days to realize he wasn't invisible anymore. He didn't want to talk. Not to cameras. Not to reporters. Not even to well-meaning people who said, "You're so brave." Like bravery was a shield you could grow overnight. He wanted to be home, in his room, with the plastic dinosaur on his nightstand and the one window that let in just enough light. But the doorbell rang every hour. News vans parked like they were moving in. His mother unplugged the landline. Terrence stayed inside. On the third day, someone left a note taped to the door, in child's handwriting. "I'm sorry they did that to you. My brother's scared too, but he said you made him feel stronger." Terrence read it 3 times, folded it carefully, put it in his backpack. Judge Clay hadn't made a statement. He didn't have to. The system did it for him. The Judicial Ethics Committee placed him on administrative leave within 6 hours. By the end of the week, his past cases were under full review. His face, pale and defensive, appeared on every outlet, beside headlines like, "Judge who sentenced 10-year-old without evidence under fire. Racial bias caught on tape." How many sentences were wrong? Some defended him. Taken out of context, he served for decades. He was just venting privately. But the tape didn't stutter. It was clear, cold, and it was already louder than all the rebuttals combined. Terrence didn't smile. He didn't feel like he'd won. He didn't even feel free. He felt watched. At school, kids looked at him sideways. Not with cruelty, with confusion. He wasn't just Terrence anymore. He was that boy from the tape. The boy who got a judge fired. The boy who made grown men uncomfortable without yelling. One teacher tried to say, "We're proud of you," but Terrence just blinked, because no one had believed him 3 weeks ago. Not that teacher. Not anyone. His mother told him gently, "You can talk to me." But how do you explain what it's like to be told, legally, that you don't get to grow up? How do you say that your life only mattered after it became a headline? Outside his house, people gathered, some with signs, "Justice for Terrence." Others just stood, not in protest, in guilt, in awe, in silence. Once, someone started clapping as he walked past. He turned around, went back inside. Then came the letters. First a dozen, then hundreds. From students, from prisoners, from parents, from strangers. "I never believed the court could be that wrong. Thank you for showing us. My little cousin cried when he saw your video. He said he didn't know kids could fight back. I sat on a jury once. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions." Terrence read some, stopped halfway through others. He saved every single one, even the ones that said, "You're lying." Especially those. Judge Clay was asked to speak on live TV. He declined, but a reporter caught him leaving his house. "Do you regret what you said, Judge Clay?" He didn't look up, just said, "The system's always been the system. Don't act surprised now." That clip went viral, too. This time not because of shock, but because of honesty. Unintentional, brutal, honest. Terrence's mother met with an attorney. They filed for a civil suit, not to get rich, but to force discovery, to open the files, to see how many other kids who didn't have recorders or brothers working night shifts were buried beneath rulings like Clay's. The number wasn't small. The investigation grew, so did the pressure. And somewhere along the line, people stopped calling Terrence a victim. They started calling him a witness, but they were still missing the point. Terrence wasn't trying to expose a system. He just didn't want to disappear inside one. At a press conference, a reporter finally asked him directly, "What do you want, Terrence?" His voice, quiet, was heard louder than any mic could carry. "I want kids to be believed before they're buried." The courtroom was long silent, but the ripple didn't stop at the doors. Across the country, phones buzzed. Screens lit up. Cafeteria conversations at middle schools, late-night debates in college dorms, awkward murmurs in law offices. Terrence's story had slipped through the cracks of routine and refused to disappear. No viral challenge, no #trend, just a 10-year-old who spoke one line after being told he'd never speak freely again. If justice needs me to be guilty just because I'm black, then it was never justice. That line kept showing up, typed on handmade signs, projected onto buildings during protests, quoted in tweets, etched into art, even whispered into mics during school assemblies. Terrence wasn't there to say it again, but he didn't need to. It wasn't just Judge Clay under scrutiny now. It was the entire docket. Reporters dug into past rulings. Clay had presided over more than 2,000 cases in his career. A disturbing number involved black minors, given maximum sentencing for minor offenses. Kids as young as 13. No prior records. No chance. Court documents were pulled. Testimonies re-examined. Defense attorneys began to talk. Some angry, some ashamed. One, now retired, admitted on record, "We knew, but back then, it didn't feel like anything would change if we spoke up." But now they were talking, because a child had. Some networks tried to downplay it. "He's just a boy." Maybe he didn't understand the full context. The audio might have been edited. Clay's legacy shouldn't be erased by one moment. But every attempt to frame Terrence as confused only made him look clearer. He wasn't the one who misunderstood justice. He just refused to pretend it was working. In classrooms, teachers revised lesson plans. Suddenly, students were asking different questions. How does sentencing work? Why can't a judge get fired the same day he's exposed? How many other Terrences are there? Some educators leaned in, others deflected. But the questions kept coming. In a middle school in Oregon, a student stood up mid-lecture and said, "If this happened to him, what's stopping it from happening to me?" No one had an answer. The class went silent. The teacher let the silence stay. That moment became its own kind of learning. Back in Terrence's city, reporters continued to camp near his block. But he wasn't home much anymore. His mother took him away for a few weeks. to stay with cousins 2 towns over. Some were quieter, but even there, people recognized him. An elderly woman at a grocery store walked past and slipped him a folded note. All it said was, "You said it better than any of us ever could." He didn't open it right away, but he held it tight. Meanwhile, Stanford Clay remained silent. He released one written statement. "I have served with honor and according to the law. I reject the idea that one moment should undo decades of integrity." He did not apologize. He did not address the tape. He did not speak Terrence's name. And that, to many, was all the confirmation they needed. Protests didn't erupt like wildfire. They moved like waves, steady, coordinated, across courthouses, outside police stations, on sidewalks in neighborhoods where kids like Terrence grew up, knowing how to stay quiet before they knew how to read. People didn't yell his name like a chant. They wrote it on shirts like a signature. Not just justice for Terrence, but this system failed Terrence. What will it do to me? In New York, a civil rights attorney filed a petition to reopen over 100 juvenile cases involving racially disproportionate sentencing. In Georgia, a high school debate team changed their state final topic to, "Is law the same as justice?" They won. In Chicago, a 16-year-old launched a podcast called Guilty Before You Speak. First episode, an audio reading of Terrence's case file, line by line, followed by 10 seconds of silence. Every week, they add a new name. They haven't run out yet. Terrence's mother didn't want him online, but she couldn't stop the wave. So she did something else. She wrote a letter, published it in the local paper. It began, "My son didn't ask for this. He didn't want to become your example. He just wanted to go back to school. He wanted to play video games, to be 10. It ended. I don't need him to be brave. I need him to be believed. That's what you owe the next child." That letter was read in full on national TV. 3 days later, a senator quoted it during a judiciary hearing. Not once did they mention Terrence's age. Not once did they deny the truth. But still, no one said sorry. Terrence returned home quietly. No press, no announcement. Just slipped back into his room, into the comfort of stuffed animals, and the same ceiling he stared at when he thought he'd never see it again. But something was different. There was a box by his bed. Inside, hundreds of folded notes from kids, all anonymous, all written in crayons, pencil, scribbled marker. "I believe you. You didn't deserve that. I would have been scared too. Thanks for saying what I couldn't. You made me brave." Terrence read them slowly, one each night, like prayers he didn't know he needed. They put his name on banners, printed it on t-shirts, quoted his sentence like scripture. "If justice needs me to be guilty just because I'm black, then it was never justice." Terrence didn't recognize the version of himself they were talking about. In their hands, he became a civil rights icon, a symbol of resistance, a hope for the new generation. But in his hands, the real Terrence, he was just trying to hold onto a pencil long enough to finish math homework. He was still 10, still hated carrots, still liked drawing aliens on the back of his notebooks, still flinched at loud bangs, still had trouble sleeping unless the door was cracked just enough to see the hallway light. But the world didn't care about any of that. They wanted the symbol. It started with requests. A nonprofit asked if he could speak at their gala. A university wanted to feature him on a youth panel. A magazine offered a cover story, "The Boy Who Changed the Gavel." His mom said no to all of them. Then came the politicians. A state rep asked if Terrence could appear in a campaign video. Another asked if he could write a quote for a juvenile sentencing reform bill. The answer was no. Terrence didn't want to speak again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But people kept asking. He was walking home with his mom one afternoon when a woman stopped them. She wore a shirt with his face on it. She smiled big. "You saved my son," she said. Terrence didn't know what to say. He looked at the ground. The woman kept talking. "You're going to grow up to be a leader, maybe president." Terrence winced. His mom stepped in. "Thank you, but we're just trying to get home." That night, he asked her, "Do I have to be something now?" She knelt down, held his face in her hands. "Baby, you just have to be." But just being is hard when people expect more every day. At school, his classmates were split. Some treated him like a celebrity. Others didn't talk to him at all. One kid said, "Bet you think you're better than us now." Another whispered, "Wish it was me up there." I could have handled it cooler. Terrence didn't want to handle anything. He just wanted to blend back in. But blending doesn't work when the whole country saw your eyes on a TV screen. He started spending more time in the nurse's office. Said his stomach hurt. Said he was tired. Said he had headaches. The nurse called his mom. Nothing's wrong physically, she said, but he's carrying something. His mom knew. How do you explain to a child that the world wants to put their pain on a pedestal? One night, Terrence locked the bathroom door and sat on the floor. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat. For almost an hour. His mom waited outside. Didn't knock. Didn't rush him. When he came out, she had a cup of cocoa and said nothing. He drank it in silence. And for the first time in weeks, he slept through the night. Meanwhile, bills were being drafted. One named after him. The Terrence Protection Act. It aimed to ban life sentences for minors under 14, require independent oversight on juvenile cases, and mandate racial bias training for judges. The proposal made headlines. Terrence's name was on every page. He hadn't read it. He didn't know it existed until someone showed him a news article. He blinked and said, "I didn't ask for that." His mom said, "No, but maybe it'll help someone who doesn't have a recorder." He nodded, didn't smile, just said, "Okay." Then came the awards. Letters in the mail. One from a city council. One from a legal organization. One from a group of high school students. Each with a certificate. Each calling him brave, courageous, wise beyond his years. They were stacked on his dresser. Unopened. Not out of disrespect, but because he didn't know what to do with them. The only thing he kept on his wall was a drawing. Not his. One from a kid in Kentucky. Crayon lines. Stick figures. One tall with a hammer. One small with a tape recorder. The small one had a smile. On the back, it read, "You beat the monster." Terrence pinned it above his bed. One afternoon, his mother found him in the living room, staring out the window. He turned and said, "If I didn't have that recorder, would I still be in jail?" She didn't lie. Maybe. He nodded once. Didn't ask anything else. Terrence didn't throw tantrums. He didn't lash out or slam his bedroom door. No shouting, no acting out in class, no dramatic breakdown. But his mother knew something had shifted. It was in the way he stopped coloring in his notebooks. The way he looked at the floor when people said his name. The way he nodded at praise like he was saying sorry. They called him brave, a fighter, a symbol. But none of them asked if he was tired. And Terrence was. Tired in a way 10-year-olds aren't supposed to know. Not tired like staying up too late. Tired like carrying a name too big for your shoulders and not being able to put down. His mother began keeping a drawer of unopened letters. Some came with awards. Some came with requests. Most came with expectations. Speak here. Write this. Join our movement. Say it again, so people will hear it this time. But Terrence had already said it. Once. In a courtroom. When he shouldn't have needed to. That should have been enough. At school, the air around him had changed. He wasn't teased anymore. But he wasn't included either. Kids didn't know what to say to him. And Terrence didn't know what to say to them. So he stayed quiet. He asked to eat lunch in the library. He stopped raising his hand in class. He turned down the volume on the world, hoping it might do the same for him. The mural downtown, the one with his face, had been updated. Someone added angel wings behind him. Terrence hated it. He wasn't an angel. He wasn't a martyr. He was just a kid who got lucky. A recorder, a brother who worked late, and a room full of people who had to listen for once. That didn't make him holy. It made him scared. Then came the documentary request. Then the children's book. Then the nonprofit that wanted to name a scholarship after him. He didn't say no because he was ungrateful. He said no because every yes made him feel smaller. The turning point came the day a group of activists showed up at his school unannounced. They held signs, chanted his name, passed out flyers about juvenile justice. One of them had Terrence's face printed across his chest. Another carried a cardboard cutout of him, holding a gavel. Terrence saw them through the window. He ducked under his desk, stayed there until the bell rang. When his mother picked him up, he asked one thing. "Can I be someone else now?" Later that week, Mr. Holloway, a family friend and youth mentor, came by the house. He didn't come with cameras or microphones, just sat across from Terrence and played checkers. Quiet. No expectations. No interviews. After a while, Terrence said, "They keep saying I changed the world." Mr. Holloway nodded. "Did I?" Terrence asked. "Maybe," Mr. Holloway said. "But that doesn't mean you owe it anything." Terrence blinked. "I didn't ask for any of this." "You didn't have to. It asked for you." That night, Terrence took out a notebook, wrote on the first page, "I didn't want to be seen like this. I wanted to be believed without needing to go viral." A few days later, Terrence asked his mom if he could speak at the local youth town hall. No press, no stage, just kids and questions, and a room that didn't expect to be changed. She said yes. The rec center was dusty. The folding chairs wobbled. The mic squeaked. It was perfect. Terrence stood in front of maybe 30 kids, some younger, some older, all watching him like he was something between a ghost and a superhero. He took a deep breath, read from a page he hadn't shown anyone. "I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to be called strong for surviving something I shouldn't have had to survive. I didn't want people clapping for me like I won a game. I wanted someone to say, that never should have happened. I wanted to go to school and not be the reason a room goes quiet. I wanted to be able to cry and not have it turned into a hashtag. I wanted to be a kid, not a quote." He looked up. No one clapped. They just sat with it, let it settle. Afterward, a girl came up to him, maybe 12, maybe 13. She said, "I felt like that too, but I didn't have the words." Terrence nodded. "Me neither. I had to write them down." The next day, someone painted over the wings on the mural, not to erase Terrence, to return him. Now the figure was just standing, alone, solid, still a child. That was enough. He still got letters, still got invitations, still saw his name in articles and summaries and policy drafts. But something had changed. People stopped asking him to represent something. They started asking how he was. Really? And when he said, "I'm okay," they didn't push for more. One afternoon, Terrence sat on the steps outside his house. No cameras, no reporters, just sun and sidewalk and a crumpled soda can he kept kicking back and forth with his shoe. His mother opened the door. "You all right?" He looked up, smiled just a little. "I think I'm learning how to be a boy again." Terrence hadn't spoken in front of a camera in weeks. Not since the reading, not since the town hall, not because he was afraid, but because he was finally free to be quiet. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like the world was ignoring him. It felt like the world was finally giving him back the one thing it took when it made him a headline. Time. His days slowed down. He slept longer, ate slower, laughed more. He didn't return to who he was before the courtroom. That boy was gone, but he was becoming someone else. Someone who got to decide his own story. Not the one the system wrote for him. Not the one strangers pinned on their shirts. Not even the one journalists asked about. His story. His world. It started with a stack of paper from the school supply closet. Just blank sheets and a handful of sharpened pencils. He hadn't drawn much since the trial. Back then, he was too busy surviving. Too many microphones. Too many people looking at him like he was already carved into marble. Now he had space. And with space came images. He started with a house. Big windows. Warm light. No locks on the doors. No alarms. Then he drew a kid inside. The kid had a hoodie and a smile and eyes that said, "I'm safe here." Every night, he added more. Trees. A lake. A school where kids didn't need to raise their hands to speak. And a city around it, not one built with rules, but with choices. Where everyone was allowed to leave the courtroom and never come back. Where justice wasn't something given. It was something lived. His mom noticed first. She didn't say anything. Just brought home better paper. Then sketchbooks. Then a used tablet someone from the church donated after hearing Terrence liked to draw. He didn't ask where it came from. He just held it like it might disappear if he stared too long. On that tablet, the world grew faster. Colors. Motion. A boy running through a forest with no walls. A courtroom turned into a garden. He named the boy Ellis. Not after anyone in particular. Just a name that felt like someone you could trust. Ellis didn't shout. Didn't fight. He just made things. Things that made people pause. things that made rules feel small. Terrence didn't tell anyone about Ellis at first. It was his, private, quiet. But sometimes, when the weight of his own name felt too heavy, he'd whisper. Ellis wouldn't carry this. Ellis would draw something better. And he would. Then one day, a classmate saw him drawing. A girl named Mira. She was quiet too. She peeked over his shoulder. Who's that? She asked. Ellis, he said. She smiled. He looks free. Terrence blinked. He hadn't used that word before, but it was the right one. Mira asked if she could write a story about Ellis. He said yes. She did. A short piece, 2 pages, about Ellis baking bread that healed people. It was weird and funny and soft in all the ways Terrence's life hadn't been in a long time. They shared it with the librarian. She cried. Word spread. Quietly, kids started adding to Ellis's world. A boy named Jaden added a skate park in the clouds. A girl named Rosa drew Ellis's little sister who could talk to animals. Someone wrote a comic where Ellis built a house out of broken gavels. It became a shared place, not for protest, not for headlines, just for breathing. One day, Terrence came to class and found a note on his desk, written in pencil. Thank you for Ellis. I used to only draw fences. Now I draw doors. They created a small zine, The World of Ellis. Printed it in black and white. Gave away at school. No price. No ads. Just stories, drawings, poems, things that reminded people you don't have to be loud to leave a mark. The principal asked who came up with it. Terrence just said, it was everyone. And it was. Mr. Holloway came by with a surprise. A grant, small but real, to build an after-school art room. No speeches, no plaques, just a space. Terrence helped paint the walls. He chose yellow, bright, not too loud, like sunrise before people wake up. He painted a quote near the window. Make room for the kid who stopped talking. He might be building something better. One afternoon, a reporter tried to visit. The school turned him away. This isn't a story, they said. This is a garden. Let it grow. The reporter didn't write anything, but later, he sent a donation. Anonymously, Terrence's mom asked him one night, do you miss it? The attention? He shook his head, then paused. Sometimes I miss being heard, but now I feel listened to. He still drew Ellis, almost every day, but now Ellis wasn't alone. He had neighbors, friends, a dog who barked poetry, a teacher who let kids nap in class without guilt. And Ellis smiled more, because Terrence did. It started with a hallway. Always does. Not the kind that echoes with shouting. The kind where silence stretches long, almost too long, right before something happens. Terrence was walking back from a library, sketchbook in hand, head down, comfortable in the rhythm of being left alone. That's when he noticed a boy, smaller than most of the kids in his grade, backpack heavy, almost tipping him sideways, shoes too big, and 2 older boys flanking him, not shoving, not yelling, but saying just enough, just close enough to make it clear. You don't belong. Terrence paused near the water fountain, didn't say anything, didn't move yet, just watched. The boy didn't cry, didn't speak, just kept walking like gravity was louder than the voices. Then one of the older boys knocked a book from his hand. It hit the floor, loud in a hallway where quiet had turned sharp. Terrence moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step between them. He just walked over, picked up the book, and handed it back. Looked the boy in the eye. You good? The boy nodded. Not a strong one, but enough. The older kids stared at Terrence. One of them scoffed. You still famous or whatever? Terrence blinked. No, he said. Good. The kid muttered, then walked off. Because there wasn't a camera. Because no one was clapping. Just 2 kids. And someone who saw something they weren't supposed to. The boy's name was Isaiah. Terrence learned that later. After school, they sat on the steps by the soccer field. Isaiah didn't talk much, but he asked about the book Terrence was carrying. World of Ellis, Volume 3. You draw that, he asked. Yeah. Ellis the one with the magic pen? Terrence smiled. Sometimes. Other times he just builds stuff. Isaiah nodded. I like the part where he builds a wall so the bad thoughts can't follow him. Terrence tilted his head. I didn't think anyone would notice that part. Isaiah shrugged. I noticed the parts that don't get explained. The next day, Isaiah was waiting by the lockers. Didn't say why. Didn't ask permission. Just started walking with Terrence between classes. No questions. No declarations. Just footsteps in sync. In art class, they sat next to each other. Terrence showed him how to blend pencil lines for shading. Isaiah showed him a trick with folding corners so your sketchbook doesn't get bent. They didn't talk about bullies. Didn't talk about courtrooms. Didn't talk about what it means to carry silence inside you like armor. They didn't have to. Some things don't need narrating. One day, Isaiah handed him a folded sheet of paper. I drew something, he said. Terrence unfolded it. It was Ellis, but different. This version had a crack down his chest and a light shining through it. I didn't know if it was okay, Isaiah said. Terrence stared at the drawing. It's more than okay, he said. It's real. That week, they added the drawing to the Ellis zine, uncredited, just a title beneath it. Things that don't break, just shift. It became the most talked about page that issue. Not because it was perfect, because it was honest. By winter, Isaiah was a regular at the after-school art room. He didn't speak much, didn't show his drawings often, but every now and then, he'd leave one taped to Terrence's desk. No name, just a small star drawn in the corner. His quiet way of saying, I'm still here. At the next community reading night, Terrence didn't read his own work. He read Isaiah's, a story called The Ladder That Only Goes Sideways. It was about a boy trying to climb out a hole, only to find the ladder was built to carry him sideways to other people, to places with better light. The room fell silent after the last line. Then one girl whispered, that's exactly how it feels. Terrence nodded, and for the first time, Isaiah smiled in front of a room full of people. One afternoon, Isaiah didn't show up. Then another. Then a week passed. Terrence asked around. Teachers shrugged. No one knew, or no one was saying. So Terrence walked to the apartment building Isaiah had pointed out once. Waited on the stoop. An hour passed. Finally, Isaiah came out. Eyes tired. Backpack half-zipped. He saw Terrence and froze. Terrence just said, "Want to walk?" They did. 2 blocks. No words. Then Isaiah said, "We had to move for a bit. My mom didn't want anyone to know." Terrence nodded, then said, "You're not alone." Isaiah looked away. "I know. Just sometimes it feels easier to vanish than to be watched." Terrence understood. He really did. The next scene issue was called Things That Stay. On the first page, a joint drawing. Ellis and a new character. Eyes wide, arms full of stars. Running. Not away, but towards something. Underneath. Drawn by T+I. No one asked what it meant. They just nodded and passed it on. It didn't start as a movement. It started as a folded paper, passed between 2 desks. A drawing of a lighthouse with no ocean, just standing alone on dry ground. In the corner, a small star. Isaiah's mark. Terrence didn't say anything. He just folded it again, tucked it into his sketchbook and smiled. By spring, the art room had changed. The air was different. It wasn't quieter, not in the way people think quiet means silence. It was quieter in the way forests are quiet, full of sound that doesn't beg to be noticed. Kids came out to talk, but to be together in the same room while not being alone. They brought pages, pencils, ideas. Some had comics, some had poems. Some just drew lines and erased them, and that too was enough. The only rule on the wall was written in chalk above the whiteboard. You don't have to explain it. That rule changed everything, because explaining meant performing. And performing was the one thing these kids were done doing. They performed in courtrooms, at homes with yelling doors, in schools where participation meant agreeing, in places where being noticed came with a price. But here, they didn't need to be brave. They just needed to be real. It was Isaiah who came up with the idea. They were working on Ellis and Company, Volume 4, the biggest scene yet, when he said, "What if other schools had an art room like this?" Terrence looked up. "You mean like another art club?" "No," Isaiah said, chewing his pencil. "Like a hidden thing, quiet, like ours, but in other places." Terrence raised an eyebrow. "A network?" Isaiah shrugged. "Maybe." Terrence didn't answer right away. But that night, he opened his sketchbook and started designing a logo. A small open door. Nothing fancy, just slightly cracked. Enough for light. They called it the Ellis Project. No launch, no press release, just a note passed to a kid in another school who always sat alone at lunch. Inside, a mini-zine, 8 pages, folded neatly. On the back, a handwritten line. If you ever need to draw something you can't say out loud, you're not alone. Start here. First school, 5 kids. Then 11. Then 23. Each new Ellis room was different. Some in storage closets, some in libraries. One was just a bench behind the gym where kids left drawings in a weatherproof box. They didn't need permission. They needed space. At one school, a janitor found a pile of drawings tucked under the lost and found shelf. He turned them in to the front office. A teacher recognized the name Ellis and smiled. She didn't ask where they came from. She just added paper and markers to the shelf the next day. At another school, a student council member added a line to the morning announcements. If today feels heavy, the Ellis shelf in room 30 for his pencils, paper, and quiet. No one questioned it, but more kids started visiting room 304, even ones who didn't draw. They just sat, and sometimes that was all it took to keep the weight from sinking them. In one Ellis room, a boy named Dev wrote stories about a character named Moonchild. Moonchild didn't speak with words, only colors. Every emotion came out in strokes of blue, gold, or gray. Dev's teacher found one of his stories and asked to publish it in the school paper. He said no, not because he wasn't proud, because the story wasn't written to be read. It was written to be felt. The Ellis Project spread quietly. No hashtags, no campaigns, just trust passed hand to hand. Each chapter had its own symbol, a key drawn in chalk, a page number on a locker, a single star on a classroom door. Kids knew what it meant, and that was enough. Terrence and Isaiah didn't call themselves founders. They didn't make speeches, didn't go viral, but every few weeks, they'd get a letter in the mailbox of the art room. Always anonymous, always simple. One had a crayon drawing of a cracked helmet and a heart floating above it. On the back, I found breath here. Adults started to notice. Some were confused. Others were inspired. A few tried to organize the project, formalize it, structure it, bring in oversight. Terrence and Isaiah said no. It's not meant to be a program, Isaiah explained. It's a pulse. By the end of the semester, over 40 schools had Ellis chapters, and not all were schools. One was in a youth shelter, one in a juvenile center, one in a hospital's cancer ward, room 12B, where a nurse kept blank pages in a folder for kids who couldn't sleep. In every space, Ellis wasn't a boy anymore. Ellis was a door. One kids walked through, holding parts of themselves they didn't want to drop. One day, a teacher told Terrence, "You've created a community." Terrence shook his head. "No," he said. "They did. I just started drawing." The final zine of the year, Ellis, the quiet issue, had no cover art, just a plain gray page. Inside, every submission was anonymous. Some were beautiful, some were messy. All were true. Terrence read each one, then added a note to the end. If you're reading this, you're part of something that doesn't need a name to be real. That summer, Terrence and Isaiah painted a mural outside school. Not of Ellis, not of themselves, just an open door, light spilling through, a sky full of stars. No signature, only a sentence in small letters at the bottom. "Leave the light on. Someone else is coming." The email came on a Thursday. It was from the Regional Education Board. Polite, respectful, heavy with praise. They were holding a youth justice conference. Keynote speakers from around the country, policy writers, judges, teachers, social workers. And they wanted Terrence, not as a guest, as a speaker. No scripts, no PR spin, just him, in his own words. His mom printed it out and handed it to him like she was passing him something fragile. She didn't say you should. She didn't say you owe them. She just said, "You don't have to decide today." Terrence nodded and slipped the paper into his sketchbook. Didn't read it again for 3 days. When he finally opened it again, he sat at his desk, turning the paper over and over like it might offer answers if he stared long enough. He'd said no before, to press, to book deals, to documentaries, because every time they'd asked him to speak, it felt like they wanted the trial, the quote, the boy who broke the courtroom. They wanted the moment, not the person. But this felt different. Still scary. Still huge. But it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a door. He showed the letter to Isaiah. Do you want it? Isaiah asked. I don't know, Terrence said. What if it's just another performance? Then, maybe, Isaiah said, this time you get to set the stage. That night, Terrence didn't write a speech. He drew a boy on a cliff, holding a light. Below him, people reaching. Not desperate, just waiting. And above, stars. Every star had a name. Ellis, Isaiah, Dev, Mira, Moonchild, even Clay. Because whether they hurt you or helped you, they became part of your sky. He said yes, quietly, simply, no fanfare. The conference coordinator called him personally. You could say anything, they promised, or nothing at all. Terrence said, I'll bring my sketchbook. The auditorium was larger than anything he'd ever stood in. Red seats, polished wood stage, banners that read, Reimagining Justice. He sat backstage with his notebook in his lap. He wasn't nervous. He was calm, but that stillness held something tight. A breath he hadn't let go in years. Before he walked out, Isaiah whispered, You don't have to carry everything, just enough to stay honest. Terrence nodded, then stepped into the light. No music played. No introduction read. Just Terrence, a mic, and the slow hush of a room filled with people who were, finally, ready to listen. He looked at the crowd. Some faces older, some tired, some familiar from photos, articles, headlines. And then he opened his sketchbook. He didn't start with words. He held up a drawing. A courtroom turning into a river. Benches floating. The gavel sinking. I drew this the day after my case was dismissed, he said. Voice low, even, certain. Everyone kept asking me what I was going to do next. But no one asked if I was okay. So I stopped answering. He turned the page. A boy sitting at a lunch table alone. This was me 2 weeks later, at school, where being famous felt like being in trouble. Next page, Ellis, standing, arms wide, words behind him in clouds. Then I started drawing someone who wasn't me, but who felt like the only person I could trust. He kept flipping. I didn't want a movement. I wanted to breathe. And sometimes that takes longer than justice. The room was still. Terrence looked up. You called me here to speak about change. But change isn't loud. It's not a policy or a program. It's a space where someone says, you don't have to prove anything today. He stepped back from Mike, held up one last drawing, a blank page. This is a part I'm still figuring out. The applause didn't erupt. It rose slow, gentle, the kind of applause that didn't say, we're proud of you. The kind that said, we'll wait for you. Afterward, he didn't stay for photos, didn't sign anything. He walked outside with Isaiah. The air was cool. Trees moved like they were breathing too. Isaiah asked, do you feel different? Terrence thought, I feel like I told the truth without bleeding. Isaiah smiled. That's enough. The summer came slowly. Terrence felt it first in the quiet. The kind that hums through open windows and long mornings where no one rushes to speak. The courthouse was no longer the center of his story. Neither were the microphones, the murals, or the moments that used to feel like fire. Now it was walks to the corner store, pages added to sketchbooks, new names in the margins, and friends who didn't expect him to say anything profound. He had stopped checking the news, stopped looking at comments, stopped counting how many schools had joined the Ellis Project. None of that was about him anymore, not in the way people thought. It was about kids like Isaiah, like Dev, like the girl in room 30 for who drew stars when words failed her. That was the point. To start something and let it walk without needing to hold its hand. He spent more time with his mom. They cooked together. Badly at first. Burnt toast. Undercooked rice. But they laughed through it. She asked him once, do you miss it? The noise. He thought for a moment, then said, sometimes, but only when I forget how loud quiet can be when it's yours. One afternoon, he was invited to a new library opening. They'd added a reading nook designed by students. In the center, a low shelf of handmade zines. Some were Ellis copies, some weren't. All were stitched together by kids who learned how to build soft spaces with hard truths. Terrence walked through without speaking. He saw his name on the wall. Not big, not bold. Just listed under contributors. He smiled, not because it made him proud, because it didn't have to anymore. In the fall, he started writing something different. Not Ellis, not sketches. A book. It didn't have a plot yet, just a title. Things I was allowed to become. He wrote one line a day, sometimes none. Sometimes he just stared at the paper and let it stare back. That was part of the story, too. Isaiah had grown taller, still quiet, still sharp, but with a new ease, like he'd stopped asking the world for permission. They still met twice a week. One day, Isaiah said, "I think we stopped disappearing." Terrence replied, "I think we were just learning how to show up slow." Their art room got repainted, a soft green this time, the kind of color that doesn't demand anything from you. They added a box near the door. If today is hard, leave something behind before you go. By year's end, it was full. Letters, sketches, one single shoelace and a note. "I don't run for myself anymore." Terrence never called himself an activist, never used the word survivor to describe what happened. He said once, during a small group circle, "I didn't survive it. I just stayed long enough to find something else." And when a boy asked what that something was, Terrence answered, "A reason to imagine again." On the anniversary of the trial, someone emailed his mom asking if he'd do an interview. She asked him. He said no. Instead, he and Isaiah spent the day building a kite. Red and gold, not fancy, just strong. They took it to the park, ran until it lifted. It wobbled, caught, then soared. Isaiah asked, "What should we name it?" Terrence thought, "Clay." They both burst out laughing, not bitter, just full. Later that week, they sent a new Ellis scene to a school they'd never been to. Inside was only one line: "This is not a rescue. It's a mirror. We see you." By winter, Terrence's room had changed. Fewer trophies, more art. His desk was filled with things that didn't need to be perfect. Crinkled pages, old pens, a photo of his mom asleep on the couch with a book in her lap. He pinned a note to his wall. "I didn't want to be remembered. I wanted to be left alone, just long enough to become someone worth remembering." He still drew Ellis sometimes, but less. Not because he was done, because Ellis was out there now, in the hands of kids who needed him more than Terrence did. That was the truest kind of legacy. Letting go without vanishing. Some nights, Terrence sat on his porch and just watched the street. One night, a kid walked by with a hoodie too big, a sketch pad under their arm. They nodded. Terrence nodded back. No words, but the light between them said, "Keep going." Because, in the end, the boy who was nearly buried by silence didn't rise as a symbol. He stayed. He listened. He built something. And that something will outlive every headline. If you've ever needed time to grow quieter before you found your way, if you've ever left a page blank because the noise was too much, if you've ever wished someone would just sit with you and not ask questions, then you already understand. Some stories don't end. They just stop needing to prove they began.